Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
Washington waits for word on interest rates and U.S. military involvement in Iran. Welcome to the Wednesday edition of Balance of Power. We're live from the nation's capital with a lot of questions to answer today. Wall Street is watching as well. We'll be joined ahead by Republican Congressman Mike Lawler of New York, who is trying to hold the line on SALT all the while in the president's big, beautiful bill. We've got a lot to talk about ahead with analysis from our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis are with us about a half hour out from our special Fed coverage here on Bloomberg. Let's set the baseline first on Wall Street, where we stand ahead of the Fed meeting with Charlie Pellet at World Headquarters in New York. Hey, Charlie.
And good day, Joe Mathieu. Stocks higher right now. Again, special coverage coming up of the Fed, 1:30 p.m. Wall Street time right here on Bloomberg Television and Radio. 2 o'clock, that's when the actual decision drops. 2:30, Jay Powell's news conference. We got you covered here at Bloomberg. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. Stocks higher after President Trump said Iran has reached out about the possibility of negotiations, bolstering hopes that Tehran's conflict with Israel will de-escalate. And the Federal Reserve is expected to reiterate it needs more clarity on the impacts of government policies before adjusting borrowing costs. So here's where we stand. The S&P 500 index right at 6,000, up 18 now, up 0.3%. The Dow up 108, up by 0.2%. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 90, up 0.5%. The outperformer, the Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares, that is gaining now by 1%. The 10-year ahead of the decision, 4.35%. The 2-year, 3.92%. Spot gold flat on the day, $33.90 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.6% right now, $74.45 a barrel on WTI. Texas Instrument shares are up 0.5%. TI touting plans to spend more than $60 billion on semiconductor plants in the United States, making it the latest chipmaker to promote its domestic manufacturing ambitions as the Trump administration urges investments and threatens to upend the sector with tariffs. Recapping stocks higher, the S&P right at 6,001, up 0.3%, ahead of the Fed decision of the 10-year, 4.35%. Balance of Power continues right now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, Joe Mathieu.
All right, Charlie, many thanks as we count down to the Fed decision here on Bloomberg. We'll hand things back to World Headquarters in New York, as I mentioned, about a half an hour from right now. Get you set up for this decision at 2 in live coverage, of course, Jay Powell's news conference that will follow. I saw Bloomberg's Michael McKee before he headed over to the central bank, crafting some interesting questions for the Fed chair, who the president has already been talking about today, referring to Jay Powell as stupid on a couple of occasions, using the nickname too late, suggesting that he should start cutting rates yesterday, and that's not expected to happen today. We'll have more on that a little bit later this hour as we walk up to our special coverage with Kitty Richards, senior fellow at the Groundwork Collaborative. We'll be changing our view on things as we get closer to the decision. We want to stick with the beat on what's happening here. Meantime, on Capitol Hill, it is not only a conversation today about whether we're going to see U.S. military involvement in a more offensive way in Iran, and we're going to talk to Congressman Lawler about that as well. But it's, of course, Mike Lawler who has drawn a line in the sand on SALT, this being essentially the SALT network. I know how important this is to our listeners and viewers, and Mike Lawler does as well, because the Senate version from the Senate Finance Committee of the big, beautiful bill just came back to the House, and it's not what a lot of certainly members from New York and New Jersey wanted to see. Spoke about this yesterday with Senator Ron Johnson. He's a no vote on this. He wants to see deeper spending cuts. And when you start talking about deeper spending cuts or permanence with regard to business tax breaks or the Trump tax cuts, you got to find the money from somewhere. And the Senate seems to think that pulling that out of the SALT deal is part of the way to get there. Ron Johnson's still a no vote, though, as he told us yesterday here on Bloomberg. Listen.
Well, I'm currently a no. I think the House bill is something I basically support, but my problem is it just doesn't go far enough. At most, we'll be reducing spending by about $2 trillion over 10 years. We increased spending by more than $2 trillion in 1 year, from 2019 to 2020. And, you know, it's a budget reconciliation process. We ought to be talking about numbers.
Well, let's talk about numbers with the aforementioned Congressman Mike Lawler, Republican from New York 17th. It's good to see you, Congressman. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's almost like we're sitting in the same room. If you're with us here on TV or on YouTube, I feel like I can turn and talk to you. Where are you on this right now? It was $40,000, the SALT cap established in the House. It went next door and they chopped it right back down to 10. But I'm told that this is simply a placeholder, and that there's yet another debate. Are you ready to go through this whole fight again?
Look, the bill, as the Senate has written it, is dead on arrival. And I made that very clear the other day when the language came out. But here's the reality of this situation that I think many of my Senate colleagues failed to recognize. At the end of the day, the cap on SALT was nothing more than a pay-for back in 2017. And it paid for most of the provisions of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It here again is being used as a pay-for by not going back to unlimited. It's paying for the doubling of the standard deduction. It's paying for no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, the expanded child tax credit, among other key provisions, including business tax credits. And we understand that is all part of a negotiation. It's all part of having a tax bill that actually provides real tax relief to the middle class, to the working class. This is not about the billionaires or the millionaires. That's why we agreed to a $40,000 SALT cap with a $500,000 income cap. That was a hard-fought, good faith negotiation that we entered into, despite efforts to roll us. And we came to an agreement with the White House and with House leadership. We are not going back on that agreement. And I think what the Senate needs to recognize, they can make changes, they can enter into negotiations, but the fact is you need 218 votes to pass this in the House. And there is not a chance in hell that this bill will pass at $10,000, let alone less than $40,000.
So it's anything under 40 is I know you've got to talk tough on this because you hear it off the air from Republican members that the SALT guys in New York, they knew they were negotiating. They went for 40, knowing it was going to come in at 30, as the House Ways and Means Committee said. You're a no on 30,000, right?
No, if we were going to accept 30, we would just accept 30. That is a no. And I guess people, want to try and call our bluff. They tried that in the House. They tried to jam us, and we didn't fold. And we're not going to fold here. We're not trying to stop the bill. We are making the point that this was a good faith negotiation. This is the agreement, and this is what the final number is going to be. And I would just remind everybody, you look at 10,000. This isn't just about blue states. First of all, SALT applies to everybody. It's not just particular to New York or California or New Jersey. But second of all, 29 states blew past the $10,000 cap with the average SALT tax burden over the past 7 years. So, leaving it at 10,000 will be a crushing blow to middle class and working class families all throughout this country. And if the objective is to provide real tax relief and grow the economy and allow for people to invest in jobs and businesses and in the stock market, then having a real SALT cap that we can provide tax relief with is vital. And we're not going to cave on this. We're not.
Well,
so this is obviously something.
Your point's
that
taken. I just wonder, how do you fix
it?
How do you fix it, Congressman? Does this go to a conference committee? Does Mike Johnson have to carry this water for you? How do you get it back to 40?
Well, look, we're still talking to senators. We're going to have a conversation today. And I'm speaking with the speaker. And the speaker certainly understands our position. He agrees with us, even if he doesn't fully support SALT. He understands how important this is to passage of the bill. Yeah. And this is just the reality of government. You're not going to get everything you want, and you have to negotiate. We negotiated. This was the agreement. And whether the Senate likes it or not, this is going to be the number.
I want to tick through a couple of other important items with you while we have you, Congressman, because you serve as well on the Committee on Foreign Affairs in the House. Where's your gut as, in many cases, Republicans argue with Republicans about what President Trump should do right now in Iran. I know you support Israel's right to defend itself, but do we need to put American B-2 bombers in the air to help finish the job?
I don't think there's any question about that. I think Israel obviously has made tremendous strides over the last few days and really speaks volumes to their military prowess and intelligence. But ultimately, to get the job done, I don't think there's any question, the U.S. is going to have to be engaged. I'm not advocating for troops on the ground. I'm not advocating for regime change. The bottom line is Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. President Trump has made that clear for years. Republicans and Democrats, both prior presidents and in Congress, have made that clear for years. The time has come. And ultimately, we need to finish the job. They cannot have a nuclear program. They have shown a willingness to use ballistic missiles targeted at civilian populations with the express intent of killing Jews and eradicating the state of Israel. Folks have to remember, there are 700,000 Americans that are dual citizens and live in Israel, at least part-time, if not full-time. These are Americans on the ground in Israel being attacked. We have 40,000 troops in the region under threat of attack. We have to make sure that this threat is eliminated. Ultimately, a weakened Iran, a denuclearized Iran, is the best hope for the Iranian people to rise up and reclaim their government. That will be their choice. That is not a choice for the United States or Israel or anyone else. But it will give the best opportunity for that to happen. And in doing so, will give the best opportunity for peace and prosperity in the Middle East for years to come.
Wow. The time has come, says Congressman Mike Lawler. If our involvement offensively was limited to a series of strikes, as we've heard referred to, against these nuclear enrichment sites and no more, would you be comfortable with President Trump conducting this on his own, or does Congress need to have a say?
Yes, I would be comfortable with the president making that determination. Obviously, in years past, presidents from both parties have made these determinations in limited strikes without getting congressional approval to do so in that moment. And certainly if that is the decision that is made for the express purpose of eliminating Iran's nuclear capabilities, I fully support it.
Lastly, Congressman, from your perch on financial services, you're wishing there was a rate cut coming today. I'm guessing there's not going to be one. How concerned are you that Jay Powell, as Donald Trump says, is too late?
Look, despite Jay Powell's many predictions over the years, many of which have turned out to be wrong or late to the ballgame, the fact is the economy is in a very strong position. Inflation has come down. The economy is growing. And ultimately, I think when we pass the tax bill, you get deregulation into effect, you increase domestic production of energy, you bring these conflicts to an end and normalize relations and expand trade, the economy is going to take off dramatically. And I think this is something where the Fed should be looking to ease tensions to start to bring down interest rates, which is vital to economic growth. And I certainly believe that it's time to bring the rates down. I think the predictions over the last 2 months tied to the tariffs have not borne out the way many in the media and Democrats have speculated. And so I do think it is time for these rates to come down.
It's great to have you with us, Congressman. Appreciate that. Congressman Mike Lawler, Republican from New York, from SALT to Iran to the Fed. We're going to be turning things over to our special Fed coverage coming up in a little more than 15 minutes with, of course, an announcement on rates coming at 2 p.m. I want to assemble our panel with more on what we just heard from the Congressman with regard to Iran. That was an important moment. You're going to hear that played back. The time has come, said Mike Lawler. Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributor and Republican strategist, partner at Stonecourt Capital, is with us now alongside Jeanne Zaino, senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Rick, how many Republicans does Mike Lawler represent in Washington today?
I think the vast majority. I mean, the Republican Party is still pretty hawkish. In the last year, even before the elections, we had a majority in the House of Representatives supporting aid for Ukraine against Russia. I think Iran is the unifying force. It is the greatest evil empire left in the world. Compared them to Russia and China, we can have a dialogue with Russia and China, but we cannot have a dialogue with Iran. And Iran has been the basis for mischief in the world for a long time. They sponsor terrorism around the world, and so I really don't think there's a lot of daylight between the Republican Party and the need to do something about making sure Iran never has the capability of crafting a nuclear weapon.
Then there's Tim Kaine and the likes of Democrats who want to limit the president's war powers in this case. Jeanne, where are Democrats going to stand if there is an announcement from the White House that American bombers are in the air?
Well, we have heard from many Democrats who support the president if he does decide to assist openly, either offensively or certainly continue defensively. We've heard Adam Schiff, we've heard others. So there is a split in the Democratic Party. We've also heard Democrats on the other side joining people like Tom Massey. That would be Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar. So very much like the Republican Party, there is a split on the best path forward for this. And I thought another really fascinating thing that the representative said was the fact that he would not support boots on the ground. I think there are a lot of people who agree with Mike Lawler on that. They would allow for support, whether it is aid, whether it is offensive or defensive support, but not support for boots on the ground. And that is a question that has been raised by military experts. Can the U.S. really destroy Iran's ability to get nuclear weapons, not just in the short term, but in the long term, without boots on the ground? And that is a big question. And to hear him say, no, I wouldn't support that, I think is also very telling.
Rick, how, if the White House decides to act, should this be rolled out? Does the president need to address the American people in prime time? Is that old-fashioned? To what extent do the American people need to be prepared for this?
Well, we do know Donald Trump likes these big moments in a presidency. The symbolism of the Oval Office, the Resolute Desk, is not lost on this president. That being said, I would think it would be always after the fact. I mean, these are operations that are best left in the secret. No sense in telegraphing our punch to Iran. So I wouldn't anticipate the president forecasting his intent to strike Iran, to degrade his ability to manufacture a bomb, and until after the fact. And then I do think there is an opening at that point to say, okay, now let's figure out what happens next, because it may not need much more attention militarily in Iran if we do indeed use some of our unique capability to destroy these facilities.
Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino with analysis as we wait for a decision from President Trump. Bloomberg Politics contributors, many thanks to both of you for your insights as we turn our attention coming up to the Federal Reserve. Walking up now in less than an hour to the announcement on interest rates. The S&P 500 up 15 points as we prepare for special Fed coverage here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We'll hand the keys over to Tom Keene, Lisa Abramowitz in a little bit less than 10 minutes, so stay right here. Of course, the Fed decision at 2 p.m. And, well, Donald Trump knew that when he woke up this morning. He was asked about the Fed meeting by reporters when he walked down onto the south lawn of the White House today with a group of workers who were there to set up a new flagpole. It's one of the only public events he has today. No affection for Jay Powell. He called him stupid several times, suggested the Fed chair hates the president of the United States, that he was acting based on political inspirations, and had a lesson for the Fed chair. Listen.
Because of this guy's rates, if he'd lowered a point, I'd pay about a point less. Then if he'd lowered 2 points, I'd pay about 2 points less. And that's for 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, 5 years. It's hundreds of billions, it's even trillions of dollars that we're going to lose because of this too late. I call him Too Late Powell because he's always too late.
Too late, Powell. The president saying it would be nice if the Fed lowered interest rates today by 2.5 percentage points. Something that Kitty Richards is not predicting. She's with us right now, economist and senior fellow at the Groundwork Collaborative. Kitty, welcome back to Bloomberg. It's great to see you. 2.5 points. What would the market do in a world like that? And what would that say about our economy?
I think that would be pretty shocking to the markets.
Yeah.
Markets right now are expecting the Fed to continue to hold pat with rates where they are. And honestly, I think that the president is really putting the Federal Reserve in a difficult position with the chaotic management of the economy that we're seeing out of his administration. If the president wants to see Jerome Powell cutting rates, I would encourage him to not turn the Fed into a political football. But also, we really need to see stability in trade policy, in tax and budget policy, some sort of responsible stewardship of the economy. And I think that the various cross pressures created by the Trump administration are putting the Fed in a difficult position.
And not terribly impressed with the 4 straight CPI reports that the White House would point to as justification to cut rates.
And look, it's difficult. I was arguing for lower rates a year ago on this show.
Yeah.
And I think that high rates are squeezing American families. They're making housing less affordable, both through higher mortgage rates and through less building. There are real reasons to think that the Fed should be considering moving rates down at a more rapid pace. But there's also so much uncertainty created by things like the tariffs.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're seeing war in Iran cause energy prices to go up. That can filter through to inflation. It's a really difficult situation.
Liberation Day was the game changer then, in your view, and that's what's keeping the Fed's attention away from some nice CPI reports that we can talk about all day long. They're concerned about looming inflation coming from tariffs.
I think that's right. You know, inflation from tariffs, some of the Fed governors have talked about that as being transient, a word that we have heard in the past. But I do think that it's a real concern. And also, I think that there are concerns about the massive budget bill moving through the Senate now, what that would do to pressure on interest rates.
What does the Fed think about reconciliation? How do you read the tea leaves on this?
I think it's hard for me to say how the Fed will view it. You know, typical Fed policymakers are concerned about a $5 trillion increase to the budget deficit, especially to pay for something that is not going to create economic growth and stability, like tax cuts for the very wealthiest.
Yeah.
There are also real problems for workers in this bill. If the Medicaid cuts currently contemplated by the Senate bill go into effect, that's going to be millions of workers losing their health insurance, having to pay more. It's going to drive costs up. That's also a problem for the labor market. So I think the Fed they have said they're in a wait-and-see approach. We'll wait and see if that's what they say at the press conference today. But there is so much going on that I think it puts the Fed in a position of feeling most comfortable just standing pat.
Interesting. Jay Powell's an institutionalist, right? Does he take the CBO at its word when we start talking about additions to debt and deficit?
I think that the Fed understands the pressures. If you're talking about the different policy baselines that are out there.
Well, it's become a parlor game around here. The CBO is the only one who doesn't know what's going on because there's no dynamic scoring and they're not factoring in the tariff revenue. This is what we hear every day on this show.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the parlor game around the tariff revenue is the Trump administration claiming that they are going to raise a lot in tariffs and yet somehow prices are not going to go up, and we're not going to see any of that impact the American economy or American workers.
Yeah. What's the dot plot going to tell us today? Let's get to some actual news.
I'll be interested to see what the dot plot tells us today. You know, we're following what Fed governors are saying.
They're going to crank this down to one cut? Is that the idea?
I think that most of what we've seen is a wait and see approach, and they continue to wait and see, and things continue to be pushed off. I will be really interested to see what they say about the later quarters of this year. Now, that is also when we expect to see the impact of the tariffs in both inflation and the labor market.
Jay Powell is preparing to meet the press right now. Bloomberg's Michael McKee is over there. He's got a bunch of questions. They're going to throw him off. What will be his posture? What will be his tone? Any different than the last meeting? There's so many questions he can't answer.
I would assume that we're going to see a very similar approach to the last meeting. And also, as you said, Jay Powell is an institutionalist. I think that it is important to him and the other Fed governors to not be seen as overly reactive to the inflammatory statements that Donald Trump makes.
Right.
So I would anticipate a very even-keeled and very similar approach to prior statements.
What would you ask him if they called on you in the briefing room today?
I would ask him to talk about the impact of the Fed's rates on the housing market. I think that this is a really underappreciated problem with how high the Fed went and how slow they've been to cut back. We've seen both rates impacting Americans' ability to afford homes, with Americans who got their mortgages later in the rate hiking cycle. Facing much higher burdens of housing costs than Americans who have mortgages from a few years ago. And we've also seen how this impacts the housing market through the ability of builders to get financing to build more housing units.
New homes falling to the lowest level since 2020. We had a weaker than expected reading on retail sales. This has to be hanging over his decision here.
I think that's right. And housing is such a huge part of a family's budget, and it's such a crisis in this country. But again, the Fed is, I think, cross-pressured by everything that's going on.
Yeah. Really glad you could come by. Kitty Richards, Senior Fellow, Groundwork Collaborative, helping us walk up to the Fed. Many thanks for the insights.
Thank
As
you.
always, Kitty. We're going to hand things to New York now, and I'm going to meet you back here at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on the late edition of Balance of Power. We could be living in a very different world by then as the headlines cross moment to moment, never mind hour to hour. A special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance is on the way. The Fed decides, with Lisa Abramowitz and Tom Keene, live from World's headquarters in New York, straight ahead on Bloomberg TV and radio.